In this video, I'll be exploring what priority monism is, what it looks like when combined with idealism, and what benefits that combination has to offer. The entry on monism found in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy states that priority monism holds that exactly one basic concrete object exists. There may be many other concrete objects, but these only exist derivatively. The priority monist allows that the world has proper parts, but holds that the whole is basic, and the proper parts are derivative. In short, they hold the classical monistic doctrine that the whole is prior to each of its parts.
So in saying that the whole is fundamental, this holistic vision of the cosmos, in saying that one doesn't want to deny that many things exist, like you and I. Rather, on this perspective, things like you and I are to be regarded ultimately as dependent fragments on one fundamental integrated whole.
The priority monist isn't saying that only one thing exists. Rather, they're saying that only one object is fundamental, and that everything else that exists derives from that one object. This is distinct from pluralism, which holds it as the many parts that are fundamental and compose the whole.
So these issues about the metaphysical priority of whole and part are again not issues about what exists. We should all agree that there are particles, there are chemicals, there are persons, and there are larger physical systems, including ultimately the cosmos as a whole. The question here is, what's most fundamental?
Before this question is answered, I'll show what is commonly meant by fundamental. The notion of fundamentality aims to capture the idea that there is something basic or primitive in the world. This is closely tied with metaphysical foundationalism, which is the view that reality has a foundation, that there is a fundamental level in a sense that needs to be specified. The relevant intuition is often captured with the much-cited phrase that, without a foundation, a ground of being, being would be infinitely deferred, never achieved. This is a rejection of what is known as metaphysical infinitism. Dr. Josh Rasmussen explains what infinitism is and the intuition behind its rejection.
The idea is that each stage of our universe is caused by a prior stage in an infinite regress of causes, all the way out without any first cause. And this is supposed to explain why there's something rather than nothing. But does this actually explain the existence of the universe? Philosopher Richard Taylor has pointed out that the mere age of a thing doesn't explain why that thing exists. Whether it's 10 years, 100 years, or infinitely many years, we can wonder why there is that eternally old thing at all. Why there is this step. Why these things rather than some other things, or not at all? If we have an infinite stack of plates, why the plates rather than the bowls, or nothing? Although we might be able to explain the whole in terms of explaining the parts, we haven't thereby explained the plurality of the parts. We've explained each part, but we haven't explained the parts together. For the only thing that could explain the parts together are those same parts, and that would be a circular explanation. That's like bringing yourself into existence. It doesn't seem to answer that deep question. Why those parts rather than others? So this is why I don't think the infinite regress theory provides the best explanation of existence, because it doesn't provide any explanation.
Since it can't be the case that it's turtles all the way down, then something is foundational and prior to everything else.
But there's going to be some fundamental basis from which everything else, you and I and tables and chairs and other derivative denizens of reality derive.
Though it is clear that the priority monist holds that only one thing is fundamental, it still needs to be specified as to what exactly this one fundamental thing is.
And what I want to just talk about here is one aspect of the metaphysical project, which is to answer the question of what's fundamental. And as already mentioned, there are several different plausible lines that one might take. I myself prefer a kind of physicalist, materialist view on which what's fundamental is the physical state. And in particular, I prefer a holistic version of that. So I say what's fundamental is the physical state, perhaps ultimately the quantum state of the cosmos as a whole. Or you might like a less physicalist and more dualist conception of what's fundamental and think that what's fundamental to reality is the physical states in addition to certain kinds of minds or spirits or souls or something like that. Or you might even go for an idealist view on which it's actually the spirit side of the ledger that's most fundamental. And the physical and material realm is actually dependent upon that. If you hold a theistic view, that's at least one natural interpretation of at least certain kinds of theistic views, where what's most fundamental would be something like the divine spirit, and everything else would be dependent upon that.
Priority monism holds that exactly one entity is fundamental, so dualism can be eliminated as an option. This means the main options available are going to be materialism and idealism. But why should the priority monist prefer idealism over materialism?
I think one of the deepest and most difficult ongoing issues in philosophy is the status of conscious experience. It remains utterly obscure, mysterious, and elusive. How consciousness could be a physical phenomenon. The connection between your physical state and the particular state of your consciousness remains elusive.
Hi, this is Jonathan Schaffer.
Hey, Jonathan Schaffer. I just wanted to talk a bit about how priority monism can be combined with idealism. A lot of priority monists combine it with materialism, such as yourself. But it seems like there are more advantages that come with idealism over materialism. For instance, idealism dissolves the hard problem of consciousness. There's no question as to how you derive consciousness from something that is fundamentally not conscious, because the plurality of other conscious beings derives from a single fundamental consciousness. So, the hard problem seems to be dissolved if we accept idealism over materialism, and it gets even better if we combine idealism with priority monism, because now we can explain the existence of conscious beings such as you and me.
So I think it's a great issue to sort through, and I think there are some interesting and important concerns to address. I thought I might put some of the issues in a little bit of historical context by talking about what I see as sort of a kind of a strongly empiricist view that we find both in the British empiricists of the 18th century and in the logical positivists of the early 20th century.
It's interesting that you bring up 18th century empiricism, because that's when idealism made a resurgence in the West, with those like George Berkeley. Those who championed priority monism at the time were idealists, and this is made clear when we look at your citations of various priority monists. As noted in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy's entry on monism, historically, priority monism has been defended by Plato, Plotinus, Proclus, Spinoza, Hegel, Lotze, Royce, Bosanquet, and Bradley. What's so interesting about this is that every single one of these priority monists are idealists. So idealism and priority monism are right at home together and traditionally go hand in hand. But what does this sort of monistic idealism look like? The definition before was that one concrete object is fundamental. Usually, this object is seen as the physical cosmos as a whole. The idealist distinguishes themselves from this view by holding that one concrete subject is fundamental. This fundamental subject has been called many names by idealists, such as the One or the Absolute. But most famously, this fundamental subject has been identified as God. In more detail, subjects such as you and I derive from this fundamental subject. Just as we inherit our existence from this fundamental subject, we also inherit consciousness, because existence is consciousness. As Mary Whiton Calkin states, hence, the absolute self is a self, which includes this precise finite self. But since his reality is absolute, it follows that whatever exists is expression of him. Thus, because the absolute is as he is, I am what I am. This connects with the concept of subsumption. If B is a partial aspect of A, then A subsumes B, and B is therefore grounded by subsumption. Since all members of a subclass can be inferred to be members of the superclass, then we can infer that all derivative subminds are aspects subsumed by a fundamental conscious unity. Though these derivative selves are not identical with the fundamental self, they are nonetheless nothing over and above the fundamental self. In other words, the plurality of derivative minds are included or absorbed in a single fundamental mind as partial aspects of that one mind. But what about a pluralistic view that holds there is no single fundamental self from which we all derive from, but instead holds that it is the plurality of many selves that are fundamental? This is a view I will explore in more detail another time. But for now, a leading objection to this view is the problem of parsimony. Jonathan Schaffer points out that Occam's razor commands us not to multiply entities without necessity. However, Occam's laser commands us not to multiply fundamental entities without necessity. So unless it is absolutely necessary to posit more than one subject as fundamental, then Occam's laser can burn off the many selves and leave us with only one self as fundamental. As Bernardo Castro puts it,
there are many problems with this. One is that it's inflationary. It demands that your reduction base be basically infinite. You're just throwing everything, all minds you're throwing in the reduction base. You don't try to account for things in terms of simpler things. You just say, well, it's all fundamental, it's all in there. So that's one problem. It's a problem of parsimony.
So placing priority on the one instead of the many is more parsimonious and therefore offers a simpler explanation. There are other alternatives to explore, such as the combination of existence monism with idealism. There are also distinctions within priority monism, which view the fragmenting of other minds from the fundamental mind in different ways. These alternatives and distinctions will be explored in another video. For now, I will conclude by listing some of the benefits of combining priority monism with idealism. First, priority monism offers a more parsimonious view than pluralism, since only one subject is fundamental instead of many. Second, combining idealism with this view provides an explanation for human consciousness, since we derive from a fundamental consciousness. And finally, this view dissolves fatal issues, such as the hard problem of consciousness, since we're not deriving consciousness from non-consciousness. There's also no concern about a combination problem, since the many subjects are not combining to form a single subject, but rather the many subjects fragment from a single subject.